Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with Dr. Bala, and I'm so excited to have her because we all talk about diet, we all talk about supplements. You guys want to know how to lose weight, and these are things that I hear very often in the Hashimoto's world. And I've always wondered why. Like, why is it that all these women who come to me or join this organization or join this group, the first thing they want to learn is how they lose their weight? Well, we're about to change your perspective on that. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Bala.
Yeah.
Um, I would love to learn about your story and why you decided to go into this field.
Yeah. Like many of you guys, I also had an autoimmune disorder diagnosed when I was 13. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and I had just a lot of gut issues, a lot of GI problems. And after like so many surgeries, nobody could figure out what it was because I was just really young at the time to be having issues like that. So no one really knew what it was. They finally diagnosed me with Crohn's and put me on just such harsh medications. I was put on a ton of antibiotics, a ton of like antifungal stuff, and is also put on like biologics, immune suppressants. And I was 13 at the time. Like I was still growing. I just hit puberty and they put me on all this stuff. And I felt awful. I felt so bad. I told my mom, like, I don't feel good. I don't like this. And my mom was like, we don't have to do it. And so she's like, we grew up Indian. So we had a lot of like herbs and things in the house that we used a lot. And so my mom did a lot of Ayurvedic medicine. I changed up my diet a lot and everything was completely fine after that. Like my symptoms are very minimal. And so ever since then, I was very much like, okay, there's so much more out there than what I'm being told. And so, I really always wanted to go into integrative medicine. And then while I was in undergrad, my mom ended up getting sick with cancer, and she opted not to do chemo. She was told even with chemo, she would only have a few months to live anyway. So she was like, well, I'm just going to go completely natural. And so she went to India and she did a lot of like naturopathic healing. And she came back and she was totally fine. And everybody was like, what? We didn't expect you to live. And so since then, I was just like, there's so much more to healthcare that hasn't been explored. And I really wanted to go into that realm of like, what are people not getting told? I want to make sure that everybody has all of the information, every opinion, every option that they could possibly have like presented to them before they're like, okay, I guess I should do this versus this. So that's kind of what drove me into being a naturopathic doctor.
That's incredible. So you were able to heal your Crohn's disease naturally.
I was, yeah. I mean, I still to this day have some symptoms here and there, and I manage that. Sometimes I get like flares. Definitely when I'm stressed out, it comes out more. But yeah, for the most part, I have never had to take any medication, so I'm really grateful for that.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I would love, like, a lot of the women, they have Hashimoto's and then they have Crohn's or they have another autoimmune condition. So it's amazing that you were able to heal that. And I just want to ask you, like, like with autoimmune conditions, we all have antibodies to certain like organs or tissues, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone gets so fixated on like getting rid of their antibodies and like believing that this is a diet problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, from my research and everything I've discovered, and when I healed myself, I was like, okay, this is an immune system problem. So why is it that over, 1,500 women in my group believe that, diet is the problem or their antibodies is the problem? So what do you suggest for women who are, trying to heal?
Yeah, so I feel like the biggest thing that doesn't get talked about, that's not as flashy, that's not as sexy, is stress management. This is just a big one that I see in women with really any hormonal issue, not even just Hashimoto's, but especially with Hashimoto's. This is going to be really important. So the HPT, the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis, and the HPA, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, work really closely together. So while stress technically hasn't been recognized as like an individual risk factor for Hashimoto's per se, it is pretty well known that it affects our endocrine system and our immune system. So the hyperactivity of our HPA axis actually results in an increased level of cortisol in the blood, and that can cause downstream regulations of thyroid hormone, which can cause hypothyroidism. So Acute stress has immune enhancing properties, which favor inflammation, which is helpful in those acute situations when we need inflammation to kind of heal things up. But when that becomes a chronic issue, that inflammation is when we get a problem. So in the context of like autoimmunity, that chronic stress can cause relapses. Like I mentioned before, is kind of when I start to see my symptoms happen is when I'm really stressed. So I just feel like stress management, anxiety, these type of pieces are just a lot, like they're just undervalued and underrated, I think. Surprisingly, there was a study done in 2019 looking at two groups of patients with Hashimoto's. They did an 8-week trial. One of those groups implemented treatments to address mental health and lifestyle, and the other one didn't. And the patients in the intervention group actually decreased their anti-TG titers, their stress, their anxiety, and their depression levels. And the other group, nothing changed. And so I just thought that was really interesting. I was like, I just feel like people are sleeping out on this like big piece. Everyone's always talking about supplements, diet, you know, the flashy, sexy stuff, but no one's talking about addressing your anxiety and like maybe the root cause of what's actually happening.
Yeah, you're so right. And so these two groups of people, were they on like levothyroxine or any sort of pharmaceutical medication?
Yeah. They were also taking, if I remember correctly, they were also taking levothyroxine, and they measured their antibody levels. They did like subjective measurements with questionnaires and stuff for their stress and depression and anxiety levels, and they measured them before, and then they did like, I think it was like therapy with like a talk therapy, and then like things to address their anxiety, and then they questioned them again 8 weeks later and found that all of those levels had decreased significantly. So and like their antibodies decreased just from that. They didn't get any other therapies. All they got was like mental health therapies.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought that was so interesting.
It makes so much sense. And like, I think a lot of people, they don't like look into their inner self to understand that oneness, that connection. And spirituality is like the last thing on their list. That mind body connection is not something of interest. But even for me, like I had 3 autoimmune conditions, and most people know that. And I haven't had one, knock on wood, since then. But like I also was able to address the core issue, which was these traumatic events around body image and like weight loss, and being in the fitness industry. And that's like, you see all these Instagram models, and
Totally.
they really influence your perception on how you're supposed to look. And being that overachiever, you will go take that ball and run with it until you get those results. And that causes not only a lot of psychological stress, it causes physical stress, right?
Absolutely.
And I think, people don't really check into themselves to even understand themselves at that level. It's very like surface level.
No, I totally, and this piece is something that one of my mind body therapists have told me before. And don't ask me any more details on this because I couldn't tell you, but he told me, he was like, people who end up with autoimmune diseases, it's because they have like, they're too strict about, what they're letting into their lives. Like he used the example of HIV and cancer being, those type of diseases are people who just have no boundaries with their lives at all. Like they just let whatever happen, they have no boundaries with people. And whereas people with autoimmune disorders, they're really strict and uptight about everything. And then they end up having their body attack itself. I just thought that was such an interesting way of like looking at health from the perspective of like your mind and how you're relating to the world. It was so interesting. It stuck with me ever since you told me.
That is so true. And that used to be me. Like, my friends used to be like, oh, she's way too rigid. And I didn't understand what that meant, because when I was younger, I was like, okay, if I follow something to a T, then I'm going to get the results that I want to see. And that's what I believed in. And so, when I worked with naturopathic doctors and I didn't see results, but I was so stressed about like, oh, I have to take my supplement at like 5 p.m. I have to like go do yoga. I have to do this workout. And, and it consumed not only my mind, but my days.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I used to be the same. Like I was such a control freak, and I'm still working on that a little bit. Where it's like, but I just have to learn to let go. And like it's really interesting to think about it in that way of like, the way that you are and interacting with your environment and the world totally has effect on your physical body too.
Absolutely. And and then I decided like to kind of get rid of that mindset, because like when you're a control freak, I mean, you can tell me like how is it like not to be a control freak? Yeah, it's not easy to like get out of that mojo,
Mhm.
right?
Right. Yeah, it's not easy.
So like I did something really spontaneous where I just like, had the bravery to put myself in a plane and go to a random country and live there for like 3 weeks, where I would not have any of my supplements or diet or anything, no workouts, and because they had no gym there.
Right.
So
And
I
how
had
did you feel?
so I'm like, okay, so this is gonna like force me to change my lifestyle. It's gonna force me to just be free and like breathe and be okay with like not being so rigid about everything all the time.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
I like felt like it was like the stress was just gone.
That's amazing. That's really amazing.
you know and so then I got like addicted to traveling, and and I realized that all these people that were so concerned about their body weight and their weight, and I was concerned too. I was like, okay, if I travel and whatever, I'm gonna like get fat again or whatever. And when you eat a healthy diet, when you have a healthy palate, you don't like get fat overnight. It doesn't
Right,
work that way,
right, right.
but it's like I think a lot of people when they have Hashimoto's, it's very sad, but they almost go into this like fear of food. And
Absolutely. And I see that actually with almost all of my patients, Hashimoto's, PCOS, irregular periods, PMS, whatever it is, like women are just afraid of food. They're afraid to eat. They want to eat the right thing. And they're so like focused on like, I need to eat the right thing. I need to eat the right, this, I need to eat the right way or like whatever it is. And it just takes the fun out of eating. Like food should be pleasurable. And I just feel like in our society now, it's not like, it's a chore.
right, and given that like our food is so different than it used to be hundreds of years
Right.
ago, with additives and all sorts of things, but at the same time it totally takes the joy out of eating and joy out of life to be
Right.
monitoring everything like that.
Exactly.
So how do you like work with women who come to you with like the fear of food?
It's definitely hard because I don't do a lot of like the counseling aspects, and I definitely recommend like always working with a therapist in conjunction to doing any type of integrative treatment, because I'm always, mind, body, they're both connected. So whatever I'm doing for your physical body, you also need someone helping you for your mental health. So that, helps a lot with like your relationship with food. I think exploring that with a therapist is always so helpful. So I always recommend doing that. And then I also say, I don't care about the scale. I don't care how much you weigh. My goal is never weight loss for anybody. It's always just about how do you feel. So if you feel good, you have energy, you're sleeping well, you're not constipated, your hair isn't falling. Like if all of these are taken care of, I don't care what you look like or what the scale says.
Exactly. And I know like with a lot of these symptoms, like hair loss, if you've been undernourished with Hashimoto's,
Mm-hmm.
it's like the last thing that will grow back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I don't think the body cares about hair loss
No.
as much as fighting other fires off in your body.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, hair is always the last thing to come back in any disorder, whether it's stress or autoimmune related or whatever it is. Your hair is always the last thing we see to grow back. So you do have to have some patience there with that.
Right. And like, I guess maybe we can go into the antibodies a little bit, because we have the, anti-TG, we have the TGAB,
Mhm.
and the TPO. Like, what do all of these mean?
So they're all just different markers for looking at where your thyroid is getting attacked. So there's anti-TG, anti-TPO. That's the thyroid peroxidase. It's just a different part of the molecule. And so I don't know that I would necessarily say that one of them is going to be more important than the other. I would say we need all of them to kind of see what's going on, and it's a good marker for how your autoimmunity level is doing. So that's kind of how I use it as a marker. I don't necessarily say this is the end all be all. I say, okay, your antibodies are elevated, let's work on some stuff, we have things to do, and then we'll check it again in a few months and see, is it going down. And it's not, if it's going down, I just want to see the trend that it's going down. I don't care about like getting it to a perfect number. It's more about, are we doing the things to make sure that it is decreasing? Are your symptoms decreasing? Do you feel better? Again, a lot of subjective information, but along with these objective information and markers, we see, okay, what's happening here? How are we how are the therapies that we're doing working to help lower these?
I see. So, like, I heard that the anti-TG is like long-term Hashimoto's versus TPO. It's like short-term. It could change anytime.
That's interesting. I haven't personally heard that. I will have to look into that a little bit more. I look at both of them, and what I've actually noticed is I see more anti-TPO more than I see anti-TG being elevated. That's just my own personal what I've seen. So I will have to look into that. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, and then there's the TGAB, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, so that's the thyroglobulin antibody. So that's like the molecule itself. So there's just different places it can attack. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, about like what like the long term versus short term acuity of each of these markers. So yeah, I'll definitely have to look into that because I'm very curious now to see like if there's a correlation there.
yeah, and in terms of like, the immune system, because I guess you and I both know that this is, even with Crohn's or Hashimoto's or IC or any of these diseases, PCOS, it's an
Mm-hmm.
immune system problem. And like, if your immune system is working the way it should, you can eat basically anything besides gluten, I would think. But like, you shouldn't have to restrict yourself from so many different things. And like, I mean, I traveled to 34 different countries, and there was no way I'm going to get organic strawberries and the perfect breakfast. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I traveled because I had to teach myself to let go of that and be creative and be okay with not having that sort of rigid mindset.
Right, right.
Where if I was at home, I'd be like, okay, I have to wake up, go work out, take these supplements, come back, do this, and it's consuming. So, yeah, if anybody is still in that mindset, I definitely would urge them or encourage them to sort of be spontaneous and
Totally, totally.
do something that's like out of your comfort zone, and learn that you'll be okay, doing that. And it's like these baby steps, because I mean, sometimes, we all wish we had that cheerleader, or we wish we had that mentor that would sort of guide us through this process. And there are times that we don't have that, and we have ourselves, and we have to fix ourselves. And we have great doctors like yourself to, help us along the way. But at the end of the day, it's like, how are we fixing our own problem,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, yeah. So, how do you like work with the immune system?
Yeah.
Work.
So do you mean like how can we kind of address that autoimmune piece?
Yeah, I mean, and make sure that, it doesn't, because it usually goes from one organ to another, right? If you heal Hashimoto's, how do you know it's not attacking another organ,
Sure. Right,
right?
right, right. So I always like to start with the basics. One of my mentors once said, you wouldn't mow the lawn if the house is on fire, which kind of translates to, don't throw medications and supplements at a patient when the foundational important pieces like your diet, your lifestyle, your stress, your sleep, etc., aren't being addressed. So like your house is on fire would be your erratic sleep schedule or your yo-yo diet or your crash and burn exercise routine. It would really just be silly to kind of only hack your health or mow your lawn with supplements or even medications while your health house is on fire, right? I don't know if that totally makes sense, but it's kind of like I want to make sure your foundational overall health is taken care of before I'm going to throw in like the fancier pieces, um, like supplements really. So that's really where I like to start with addressing the immune system. So figuring out your gut health. And like you said, we shouldn't have to be on such a like restrictive cutting out foods forever type of diet. Once we've kind of addressed a little bit of that immune system piece, we should be able to introduce these foods again and not have reactions. So yeah, definitely getting your sleep habits, your sleep hygiene figured out, addressing your stress is always a big one that I talk about. Managing those foundational pieces, because without that foundation to build on, supplements are going to be less effective. Supplements are meant to supplement your healthy diet and lifestyle and not necessarily to be in place of. So once your house isn't burning, then we can kind of see which medications or supplements may be truly useful for you in particular. Like once we've kind of cleared the rubble and we can see, oh, okay, this is still what you need support in, let's try this.
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. Do you have like a case study you can share with us, like
Um,
someone
ooh,
you worked with?
let me think about somebody that would be a good case study. Yes. Okay. So I had a patient who I actually saw her today. Um, let me see. She came to me, she didn't have periods. That was kind of her main concern. She wasn't having regular periods. She wasn't having, what else was going on? Obviously, she came to me because she had weight gain as well. That was her main concern. And her periods were really irregular, and that was another concern for her. She was having a lot of hair loss. She was feeling really fatigued and tired. Her gut was a little bit off. She was having a lot of symptoms where she would go from constipation to having loose stools. It was just kind of a spectrum of stuff. I think we've been working together for like 2 to 3 months, and I just started with the basics. I was like, I don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of stuff. So all we're going to do is start with getting a good sleep schedule, because she was kind of sleeping at random hours of the night, waking up super late in the morning, and then feeling really groggy. So I said, let's go to bed around 10 o'clock and then wake up naturally whenever you wake up if you don't need to wake up with an alarm. I talked about doing some paced breathing at night before going to bed. This is a recommendation I tell every single one of my patients, regardless of what they're coming to me for. Paced breathing. If you work with me, you're going to be doing it. So I told her to do that for 10 minutes before she goes to sleep. What else do we do? And then I started slow with her because her diet was high in really processed foods. She wasn't eating a ton of whole foods, and her family was eating the same way. And I know it's hard when you live with a family that eats a certain way to change your diet. So I said, just start with eating a cup of veggies with every meal. I didn't take anything away. I just added veggies to your meal. And then drinking more water. I had her drink, I think, about 100 ounces of water a day. And trying to think what else we did for her. Yeah, I think those were kind of the main things. I added in a couple of supplements, but not much. I added in a couple of supplements to help with her blood sugar regulation. And 2 months later, she hadn't had a period in a few months. And then she told me recently, she was like, I just had a period. It was really exciting. So that was really cool to see, things are working. She on her own started exercising. On her own started doing a lot of self-help, like meditations. She started doing more mental health stuff for herself. And so that piece, of course, I'm sure has helped a lot. She took into her own hands, kind of improving her diet even more than we talked about. And now she's having regular periods. She has a lot of energy. She wakes up on her own at 6 a.m. and she goes for like a 45-minute walk slash jog. She says she feels really good. And so it's just really exciting to see, you know, it's only been 3 months and she already has her period back. She noticed she had a lot of hair growth on her face. That's gone. She just feels good. And so that's always what I like to see. You know, I don't think she mentioned anything about her weight being any less, but overall she's exercising now, she's eating well, she feels good, she's sleeping well. And that's really all I cared about. And so that's kind of, we're just working more to making sure that her periods stay consistent and that she feels good like that.
Wow. So you don't even like run the gut test or
I haven't done any tests for her. And that, I mean, we're working on the test. We were waiting until she got her period to do some hormonal testing. But, you know, sometimes like when your house is really on fire, it's just about putting that fire out. And so the small stuff went really far for her. And now that those things are kind of cleaning up, now we can kind of see, okay, what's the true issue here? What's going on? And then we can address that. And it just works better.
yeah, exactly. I love that. Like you start small and sort of build on that where most doctors they would like want all these lab tests done and
Right.
you know, I kind of stray away from that because it's like why would we get all these lab tests done when you know the house is on fire and no matter what you do.
Right. Right. Like your labs are going to show something is up. And even if they don't, you have all these symptoms. So let's start there. Like, I know something's wrong because you don't feel good.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of women do lose their, like, I guess, menstrual cycle. I think when that's off, like, you kind of have a clue that something is up, you know, and then, of course, like, the gut issues and all of that. So, in terms of, like, you know, protocols, like you mentioned sleep, stress management, you know, taking control of your anxiety. What do you recommend for women who, you know, may be looking for that like extra help or trying to figure out how they can get to the bottom of their issues? I know you mentioned a lot about the HPA and the HPT access and how they work together. And I think a lot of them don't even know about, you know, how they really work in conjunction. Because at one point when I had Hashimoto's, my thyroid levels were normal. Like my free T3 was like over 3.1 and my T4 was like a 1.4 and my TSH was like a 7 and like my aldosterone and the LH hormone were elevated as well. So, you know, like sometimes it's like is it really a thyroid problem when only the TSH is elevated but not the free T3 and T4?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I see a lot of people who come to me and they're like, I don't know if I have a thyroid issue. Like I have symptoms, but you know, my doctor didn't run the full test and I'm not totally sure. And oftentimes I look at the labs. Of course, I'm always going to look at your labs, but I also like to say, okay, what symptoms are you feeling? What is going on? How are you, like, what does your day-to-day life look like? Because if you are eating a lot of processed foods, you're not eating whole foods and you're sleeping, you know, like all of these pieces that I mentioned, that's where I like to start. So as far as protocols, I mean, as an ND, my advantage is kind of that I get to spend more time with you and really get to learn the ins and outs of your life and your environment. So because of that, I like to keep my treatments very individualized. So what works well for you is probably not going to be what works for your sister or your friend or your cousin. And I want to make sure that our therapies are tailored to what you need. So for example, like even with gut health, there's so many directions we can take it. We can look at food intolerances. We can look at your gut flora with a stool panel. We can do a microbiome test. There's, you know, even in that realm, I don't do the same thing for everyone. So I do food intolerance for some people. And then for others, I'm like, you probably need to do a stool panel. And then, you know, like a gluten-free, dairy-free diet might work for some, autoimmune paleo might work for another one. So there's so many nuances even within the umbrella of gut health and diet that can be sparsed out. So I really like to make sure that you're getting what you need and not just what like science or literature says maybe this would work for anyone with Hashimoto's, because everybody's different, you know, like your triggers are not going to be my triggers. So it's really, I like to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence of looking at the person in front of me, not the labs or the diagnosis.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's always concerned me because a lot of conventional doctors, I mean, I was mind blown when they just look at your TSH and they give you the pill,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's like, first of all, the TSH is a pituitary gland hormone. And if your free T3 and T4 are in the normal range, why are you having to take the pill? Which
Mm-hmm.
is something
Right. Exactly.
like
And
I hear that.
oftentimes what I even see is a lot of people who have their their TSH is normal, but their antibodies are through the roof, and their doctor's like, well, you know, I can't do anything until your TSH is affected. And that one is also where it's like, okay, well, you know, there's so much more that we can do to address the antibodies, not waiting until your TSH is affected, even, you know, because at that point, it's like your house is really on fire.
Yeah. So like when you see a patient with like an elevated TSH,
Mm-hmm.
but like, everything else is kind of somewhat normal. They may have antibodies.
Mm-hmm.
How would you like take care of them? Would you just ask them, "Hey, we have an option to put you on levo," or
To be honest, don't use levo very often with my patients unless we get to the point of we've tried so many things, it's been months, you're still not feeling good, your labs still haven't changed, then I would consider it. But if they're open to doing some of these other integrative things, then I say let's try those out first, because 9 out of 10 times they work. Um, so I would say I treat based on the symptoms. So if your TSH is just a little bit elevated and everything else looks fine and your symptoms aren't really interfering with your life, then I'm not going to say we need to treat this. I would, again, look at your overall picture. I like to do a very thorough intake, a very long intake, and see what does your day-to-day life look like? Where can we make smaller tweaks so that you can feel better? And then we don't really even need to worry about what is actually, you know, going on. Eventually your labs end up kind of evening out after a few months of kind of adjusting some of these lifestyle pieces. So I really like to make sure I'm looking at who's in front of me. Are they having symptoms? If you're not having symptoms and your TSH is just a little bit elevated, that's less concerning to me.
yeah, you're so right. And I came from the fitness world where, you got to count the macros and the calories and like everything that you consume basically to get a certain result. And I kind of just, a lot of my stress was from that. Like a lot of the anxiety I had was from that. And then when I went to NDs and went to like even conventional doctors for help, I guess the closest thing to stress management a doctor ever told me was that like I had to let go. And he wasn't even clear about what letting go of what, He said, learn to forgive and let go. And I said, let go of what though? So it's like, I think a lot of times, and when I was in that case, like you just don't know what's like really hindering your anxiety or what is your anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really like tap into yourself, or you don't like seek for those answers, like why am I feeling this way?
Right.
And where I started was like, what's my goal? Because like it's like, what am I trying to achieve? And at that time, I was like, hey, I'm trying to achieve a certain aesthetic look with my performance and trying to reach a certain strength level. And I'm like, okay, well, once I reach that, like, then what?
Yeah, absolutely. I think zooming out and just seeing like finding your why. Like finding your why is really important. And I think that is like the biggest motivator for so many people, you know, um, like if your main goal is weight loss, zooming back and just like taking it back and back and back until you figure out why is that important to you. You know, it's not, is it about how you look? Is it about how others are perceiving you? Is it about your worth? And, you know, your worth comes from being a certain size, you know, like there's so much further we can take it back to really figuring out why. And then that may not even be your goal once you figure out your why. Like you're going to be like, oh, my weight, I don't care about that. This is my why. Like my why is I want to be healthy for my kids and my family and society or whatever it is, you know? So I think that's super important, is kind of zooming out and being like, okay, like what's the point of this? Why am I doing this?
Exactly. And when you think about it, it's like, is this really going to expand your life? Whatever your goals are, like, okay, you reach that goal, is your life like expanded?
Uh-huh.
You know?
Exactly.
And I like, you know, for me, I was like, no. And at that time, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be able to sustain this, because there's no way you can, you know, sustain a certain like athletic look for that long. You know, you kind of have to live a normal life.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I said, you know, at one point, I'm going to be eating 3 meals a day, and I'm going to be living a healthy life where I don't have to worry about, like, you know, doing things at a certain time and a certain place. So I can be able to serve other people in a way that, you know, they can use my help, because I'm here to serve. I'm not here to, you know, like have that perception of myself and really go after that. So
Absolutely.
I think, you know, thinking from that perspective had me really letting go. And looking back, I'm like, okay, so now I know what that doctor was saying. And he said, let go. Like, you have to let go.
Exactly. It's hard. Like when someone says let go, like, yeah, what does that mean? And so exploring that, it's not easy. Like it takes sometimes years to really figure out like your full, you know, mental health. Like you grew up in a way that you grew up in for a reason. And like the patterns that you have, they served a purpose at one point in your life. Maybe they're not doing that anymore, and letting go of those habits and like those patterns, it's not easy. But like I think even just identifying that in the first place is like hard enough, and then working to undo that is its own beast.
Exactly. I mean, did you have like similar patterns or?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm still working. I still work every day with a therapist to kind of, you know, undo how I go about the day and how I go about my world and how I'm, you know, my stressors and the things that I hold on to. I'm like, okay, like I need to zoom out and be like, why am I getting frustrated with this? Why is this like stressing me out so much? And I've done so much work in trying to undo these patterns of thought. And it's hard, you know, we've lived a certain way for so long, it's ingrained, and like breaking that is, it's not easy. So it's exhausting to say, but I feel so much lighter for having done that. And, you know, like now things can come up and I don't necessarily react as harshly as I did. And I'm noticing that in my physical health, which is really great.
That's amazing. And like when you talk about patterns, can you give us an example? Like, what's one pattern you had to like get out
For
of?
me, it was really like going back to boundaries. Like I was very just, I had a lot of, I was very rigid. Like I even still sometimes can get very like caught up in these little things, and I'm like, no, it has to be this way. And then I like step back and I let go, and I'm like, what happens if it's not that way? Is it the end of the world? And I have to, you know, like go through this thing in my head where I'm like, okay, so what would happen if this and this? Okay, so you know, like just kind of talk myself through, and then be like, what is the underlying component of my stress? Like, why did this trigger me, or why did this make me feel so overwhelmed and stressed out? Like what's going on? Because if we all zoom out, we're just, you know, we come to this world, we live, we die. Like what is the point? Why am I getting so stressed out about this one little piece in my life that is like, when zoomed out, nothing. So that, like looking back, zooming out has been very helpful for me. When I'm in an acute situation, it's harder to do, but I'm kind of learning more of like, okay, I need to zoom out and just see where the underlying like anxiety or stress is coming from.
That's amazing. I love that. Zooming out. You know, zooming out on Zoom.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Love
Great
that.
podcast idea.
So, if we were to have like three takeaways, you know, because we're reaching the end of our call now,
Mhm.
what would your three takeaways be?
Yeah, so my three takeaways would probably be, of course, number one is going to be stress management. I feel like people are probably tired of hearing me say those words, but that's always going to be the biggest thing. Like finding whatever stress management works for you. It looks different for everybody, so figuring out, something in the realm of stress management. Gut health, that's always going to be so important for, autoimmune. And again, that doesn't look the same for everybody. So that's going to be, whatever it is that you need to do, whether it's diet related, like microbiome related, or maybe it's stress management because our stress affects our gut so much. And then my last one is kind of tying all of that together and saying, finding what works for you. So it's not going to be the same thing for everybody. And I know like autoimmune, just because the diagnosis is the same doesn't necessarily mean that the treatments are the same. So I really like to make sure that you're finding a practitioner that works for you. You're finding a therapy that works for you. You're finding like a lifestyle that works for you. It's not just a one size fits all when it comes to health.
That's so true. That's something I had to learn as well, that like, there's no way I'm going to like live my life in this little box.
Mm-hmm.
How do I like not think in a way that I have to live that way, you know? And so
Right.
I mean, we're made to evolve. We're made to like try new things and change. And I think people are afraid of that word change. You
Mhm.
know,
I agree. I totally agree. And it's not a bad thing. I've definitely learned to embrace change. And it's like exciting. You get to experience new things when you allow change to happen.
yeah. And it's like for me it was just an exercise to expand my horizons, because there's so much more than having to really think about. I mean, you could be health conscious, but you don't have to take it to a T where you're stressing yourself out with your food choices, you know?
Right, right. I agree. I agree.
And something I noticed was that, AIP, I didn't even know what AIP was when I had my first autoimmune condition,
Uh-huh.
or even the second one. Okay. Like I knew I had to eat healthy,
Mhm.
but no conventional doctor told me about AIP or
Mhm.
gluten free or, anything. And I healed myself like just from like I got a few treatments. I was on prednisone for 3 years, and I just healed myself. And the doctors were really surprised that, they're like, "How did you heal yourself? And why don't you need prednisone anymore?" And that's when I kind of really got in tune with the whole stress stuff, because I'm like, okay, this happened because I was doing this, and
Right, right.
it's like all these things that you're doing that's causing this anxiety is also sucking the joy out of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely. Exactly. I totally agree. And once you let go just a little bit, let go, you can kind of actually enjoy your life again. And you look back and you're like, what was I stressing out about? I didn't, you get into tunnel vision when you're stressed and you don't get to see everything else going on around you. And so when you get to just step back and like look at your life, it's like there's so much happening and you're not a part of it when you're, so zoomed in.
That's so true. Exactly. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing this amazing insight. I know it's going to help many of the women, and I'd love to like invite you back for
Yeah,
part two.
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that I could get to ramble a little bit about what I do.
Very helpful advice.
Good. Thank you.